Hello and welcome. Well, time, as they say, waits for no man. There are just 29 days or fewer than 700 hours to go until All Hallows Eve or Halloween. Now, this, of course, is when we celebrate the dead saints or Hallows, the martyrs, and, of course, the faithfully departed, including Theresa May's withdrawal deal. It's also meant to be the day that we are supposedly leaving the EU. But I can tell you one thing, black magic is at work, because in the last half an hour, the Prime Minister has been on his feet at party conference, pulling a new deal out of his bubbling Conservative cauldron. So is it the panacea that we've been waiting for? Or is it just more bubble, bubble, toil and trouble? This is BrexBox. Well, joining me today are four little trick-or-treaters, or as I like to call them, my little pumpkins. We have Belinda de Lucy, Louis Steadman-Bryce, Lucy Harris and James Wells. Belinda, I'm going to come to you first because... The Prime Minister has literally just been addressing the House of Commons. He's been addressing the Conservative Party conference. He alluded to, of course, this new deal that he is putting to the EU today. Some details were leaked into national newspapers, particularly The Telegraph, and it is a very complicated plan called Two Borders for 4 years. And I think the really interesting thing is that European diplomats said, it's a bit puzzling. Is it a bit puzzling?
Yes, it is. I mean, you can't help but feel a bit hopeful when you've watched Boris's speech. It's so different to what we had from the defeatism of May's speeches. However, if you think about it, when he first got his post, he came out and he said, I'm not even talking to Brussels unless they drop the backstop, and how far he's already been backpedalling and fallen. And, we get criticism a little bit from people who say, the Brexit party should be more supportive of Boris and trust in him more. And this is our point. It reminds me a bit like from the scene in Aladdin where the genie comes out of the bottle and goes, the almighty, the all-powerful Boris taking the EU on itty-bitty tiny little tweak to May's deal. Tiny tweak to May's deal. Yeah. And that's what we've gotten after 3 years of everything we've gone through, even setting up our own party, to have come out with May's deal with a tiny tweak. I'm just not sure it's going to sit well.
James, do you think it's a tiny tweak? It's really complicated, actually. The fact is, Northern Ireland remains in the single market. There are then these two borders, but it leaves the customs union. Were you convinced by what you've read? I mean, I know we don't have the details published as such. Do you think it's complicated? Do you think it's a tiny, tiny tweak?
I think it is a tiny, tiny tweak, yes. I mean, essentially, apart from the tweak to the backstop, we still end up with May's deal warmed up. So we still give away all of our fishing. We still have a 2-year transition where there's still no certainty for businesses. This doesn't give any certainty business because we still do not know what the deal will be at the end of the day. We give away huge amounts of money. We're still under the jurisdiction of the ECJ. So, this is, let's not be fooled. This is a slight tweak to the backstop. And, I don't even think that that the EU are going to sign up to this. The response so far. So I think the question for me is, does Boris actually think this is a sensible deal that he's put on the table that the EU is going to accept, or is this a ruse for something else?
Well, Lucy, what do you think? Is it a ruse for something else? I mean, he's been really, really clear. He said, this is my deal or no deal, take it or leave it. He's playing this big, strong card, isn't he?
Well, it was really interesting to see how he sort of put his new idea forward. He made sure that he said, we're out of the customs union straight away, but he didn't say our money, our laws and our borders straight away.
Yeah, good spot.
So, he didn't say that straight away, so that made me very sceptical. I think we have to be on a real close watch out to what's going to be happening in the next few days. But he did make it very clear that no deal was definitely still on the table. So I wonder what he's got up his sleeve or what's going to be happening there.
Yeah, and what do you think, Louis?
I don't know. It's kind of like... I can't guess this anymore because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, is he playing a game here? Because, as Belinda said, it's such a tiny change to the backstop. What is it going to do? And having heard the rumours around the EU, nobody's prepared to accept this. They're kind of dismissing it out of hand. So what is he trying to achieve by doing this? I just don't know.
Well, I think it's really complicated because it also, the very fact that the Northern Ireland remains in the single market, it leaves the customs union, therefore means that there will be customs checks. But he said there will be no customs checks at the border or near the border. The question is, What does he mean by near the border? What near is near? Well, I mean...
I don't know. I'm hoping it all leads, obviously, to a clean Brexit. You know, maybe that trick up his sleeve is to offer something reasonable, know the EU's not going to be reasonable, and therefore lead us out.
Do you remember the EU actually said that they weren't negotiating? You know, Boris wasn't making any effort whatsoever, but suddenly he comes out with this. You know, I think this makes the EU look incredibly disingenuous.
Yeah.
It makes actually something is happening behind the scenes, but meanwhile they're saying it's not.
I'm sure that's true. And also on the way here, I literally watched the Prime Minister before I came to this studio. And then as I was walking here, I was told that actually the European Union has not received anything yet because obviously it didn't want to overshadow conference. So I think what will happen is those official minutes or the deal will go to the EU, or is there now, because I hear Juncker's actually going to be on the phone to Boris very shortly.
And that's another interesting thing, is the timing of this, of releasing this. You know, it's apparently been leaked, but obviously, you know, it's been leaked by the government. So who is Boris actually leaking that to? Is it to the opposition? You know, because obviously you've got the opposition parties in Westminster that are waiting to decide what they're going to do. Boris Johnson ultimately, I think, wants a general election. So is this attempt? Is he on a fishing expedition here to the opposition parties to reel them in, to get them to act now? So that we can get a general election sooner.
OK, well, let's just go back one phase. So it does seem that it is a departure from May's deal. Yes. I do think that. Yeah. Do we think that there is something really unusually different? Do you think that this is substantially different? I take it from the looks of your face that you don't think it is.
Absolutely not. No, it isn't. It's not good enough. You know, we'll have so much more than that in this country. So
I think another thing that's worth drawing attention to is obviously we've got two elements of the deal, haven't we? We've got the withdrawal agreement, which is actually the legally binding treaty. And then we've got the political declaration. And I know from talking to insiders that the only thing they're talking about within the withdrawal agreement is the backstop. OK? The political declaration, they are going to make quite a lot of changes to.
Yes, but it's not binding, is it?
No, exactly. And I think this is why it's important to raise this with our watchers here, because not a lot of the general public know the difference between the political declaration and the withdrawal agreement. So there is a danger that Boris will dress all this up and say, look, we've made loads of changes. This isn't May's deal. But the truth is, the actual legally binding part of the withdrawal agreement is exactly the same, virtually.
Well, I thought it was really interesting because he then mentioned in his speech, he said, you know, I am European, and there was sort of no applause at all in the conference hall. And he said, we are all European, aren't we?
But it's a good, it's a good point to make.
It is a good point to make.
Because Brexit was never a rejection of Europe or a wonderful European friend.
But I did wonder whether he's doing it to butter everyone up, and then, by the way, here's my deal, you know, and by the way, I am European, perhaps you'd like to sign it.
Well, his priority, I think, as well, is the destruction of the Brexit Party. So if you notice his conference, it's getting more like a Brexit rally. The colours are changing to turquoise.
Have you seen the colours have changed?
And you know, he's stealing all our policies. People say, where are your policies? Well, we're keeping a few secret because the Tories keep licking them.
Hinted that they were going to start to take away the inheritance tax as well in one of his talks at Tory party conference. So that's another one of our policies taken. Yeah, you know, flattery is.
Well, I know we've spoken a great deal about whether we should reveal any more policies, and the answer is no, because they get stolen. And obviously, we're not even in a general election, are we? So, given the fact that obviously this deal is now going to be with the EU, come on, what's going to happen next? So Juncker's sitting here, probably next door,
having a glass of wine.
No, I couldn't possibly say that. But what do you think? What do you think the EU is going to say to this? Because I think that's true. The diplomats are all saying they are very puzzled by this because essentially got two different borders. It actually seems even more complicated than the original deal.
I think it's interesting because listening to the Conservative position on this, they feel that they're negotiating and maybe moving closer towards the EU. Having heard what the EU are saying and how they're responding to it, they're saying, no, actually, this is moving further away from what we were looking for here. So I think it's interesting, but I think it's just going to be dismissed out of hand.
Right. So, OK, so what's going to happen in the House of Commons then? Because obviously we've got the Ben Amendment here. So
you mean the Surrender Act?
Yeah, the Surrender Act.
Surrender Act.
He said it 16 times in 12 minutes, by the way, the other day. Yeah, which
I like the fact there was some double downing there.
Well, Cummings has obviously told Johnson, you say Surrender Act at any point that you possibly can. So what's going to happen then? What happens now?
I think it's a toss-up, isn't it, between a government of so-called national unity, which is a joke in itself, or whether they're actually going to try and bring this legislation forward. And I think the more, if you are a Remainer and in Parliament, the more certain of the two is to have a government of national unity. Because bringing the legislation forward is just one bit of legislation, and there will be loopholes around that. So I think that's the way it's going.
So
but obviously the problem
confidence.
is that nobody will coalesce around Corbyn.
No.
And that's the problem they've got at the moment.
So we've essentially got 4 or 5 days now until we really need to know what's going on. So obviously this Boris will put his deal to the EU. The EU will either dismiss it out of hand or say, yes, we're sort of OK with that. And then there may or may not be a vote in the House of Commons. He doesn't have the numbers, does he?
Well, the DUP, I think, well, today in the press, perhaps coming round
Never.
to perhaps. I mean, there was just a little sort of giving away the European research through the DUP, because I think they see the idea of an interim government taking, well, I call it a Remainer dictatorship, coming in, grabbing power, changing the colour of government without giving anyone a chance to vote them in. I think they're quite frightened of that. And as they signed the withdrawal agreement with May, you know, beforehand, they're under threat. Sort of, do they sign this bad deal or get no Brexit at all? So I think people might be warming up to it.
I mean, the other thing to note is we don't actually know the legal text yet as well.
We don't.
So there might be things in there which... Because I was surprised, I think at a Fringe event with the DUP, how they were actually cheering Boris.
Yeah.
And I was quite shocked at that, hearing these leaks this morning. So I think, you know, we better hold our breath, really, because we don't actually know what the detail is. There might be something in there that is more favourable for the DUP. There
may be. I just want to draw your attention to something in the Metro that I saw today, which was Britain's first ever case of Brexit-induced psychosis. And actually, I laughed originally, and then I realised, actually, this is really very important. And it does turn out that this poor gentleman has schizophrenia, but I think there is something here just generally. I think the public have had enough. I think the uncertainty and insecurity of the whole situation has actually made people very upset. You know, even speaking to my relatives, you know, they are actually... They're not even upset anymore. I think it's having a detrimental impact on people's health.
Yep, it is, absolutely. I mean, this is the sort of thing I've been not dealing with directly, obviously, Brexit mental health issues, but obviously with social issues I've been dealing with for a really long time. And I was up in Yorkshire last week doing MEP meetups. It's a sort of thing that I do when I do 30-minute slots and we have a coffee and we chat. It's really good fun, actually. But there was one gentleman saying that, you know, he went to work and there was a party and his boss found out that he had voted leave, and he said, how fast can I get you fired? You know, there is this out there, people are having these effects on their daily lives. You know, it's whether you're in, you know, your workplace or whether it's with your friendships or your family. You know, this division is getting worse and worse and worse.
It is.
And
it is. Sorry.
Just to ask a genuine question on this, because I think it's, for me, it is something that I would never single somebody out for, their political beliefs, in the same way I wouldn't their colour, their sexuality, or anything like that. But is it just one-sided? Because I don't see Brexiteers treating Remainers in the same way. You know, I don't know. That's just my experience.
It's mainly
maybe
because
somebody's seen something different.
On the whole, Brexiteers tend to be, like was asserted, you know, the sort of the working class, the sort of the majority of us are, you know, are not in positions of power. We're not in positions where we can say, you know, we can dictate people's workplaces. We're not in positions of institutions. We're not in any of those strong-held positions which are often held by Remainers.
Yep.
I used to work in publishing, and as you know, it's a very Remain-centred industry. And you know, they are very much the people with the platform to be able to get their views and opinions out there, which is why we don't see it so much on our side.
And it's them losing control. You know, for so long the status quo has suited them.
Yep.
And democracy is not sort of liked by those who like the status quo, because democracy often means change.
Well, I used to work in television, as you know.
What do you mean you still work in television? This is BrexBox.
You never get. But I mean, you had to keep your opinions very quiet because a lot of these organisations, mentioning no names, are Remain-facing organisations.
Absolutely. I mean, I was in the civil service for 6 years, and after Brexit, you know, when I left the job and I announced to everybody that I was going, the amount of people that I had coming and tapping on the shoulder, looking over their shoulders and saying, well done. You know, but people that
it's nice, but it's sad as well.
Well, it's a hostile environment
yeah.
that's been whipped up by this. Children are going to die in hospitals and Armageddon, and it's all Brexit's fault, which is why we get so much abuse in the streets. And it's whipped
for
up to make
example,
people panic.
this word surrender, and I'm a great advocate with Claire Fox and freedom of speech.
Yeah.
You know, I'm an advocate of any words. You know, you say what you want, you choose the words that represent how you perceive reality in your own mind. You know, you do that. But when Remainers started having a go at us for using the word surrender, it's like for the past 3 years we've had to put up with racist, stupid, all these different words,
and it's
Nazis,
but it's had a detrimental effect to society in general, because it means that we now can't talk openly about political beliefs and start to have that democratic conversation once again.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. Belinda, you said to me just before we came on air here, you said, you know, it's really important that actually we stop being defensive and start being just reminding people why Brexit's such a brilliant thing for the country, the free trade agreements, the fact that we'll be free.
Exactly. One of the most important equalisers in society is the vote. It means whether you're rich or poor, whether you're a professor at Cambridge or someone who's left school at 16, whether you're in the House of Lords or a road sweeper, you have an equal stake in society. And at the moment, I genuinely believe our vote is under threat. I mean, how many times have Brexiteers had to vote now? 3 times. So our vote is already a third only a third
it
of that.
Almost makes you think that you're a second-class citizen in a way. It feels like that.
And the worry, of course, is if the Remain establishment does make us have a second referendum, the worry is that actually our core supporters, you know, as you say, working class, you know, voters, have had enough, and they may not turn out and they may not vote. But then equally, then you get to a second referendum, then what's next? A third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh? How do you go on?
Is what they want. Voter apathy is, if you imagine, the EU wants people to be disengaged. They don't want people to need to give their consent to anything. They'd rather do everything behind the closed doors. And unfortunately, it's caught on to our parliament, and voter apathy would suit them. So we have to keep at it.
We have to keep at it. I want to move on now to Matthew Patten, a fellow MEP. He really, I think Claire Fox said he pulled no punches telling the EU it was institutionally racist. Louis, did you see his speech?
I did. It was a really good speech, really powerful as well, and something that is important to me and that I wanted to highlight coming into the EU, and that is that it is institutionally racist. I mean, the first time that I was in Strasbourg, I could feel it. I literally could feel it, because there was not that many people like me, and the ones that were there were cleaning the floors. And so you start to feel that. And so when you start to look at the numbers, like across the EU institutions, 1% of that is made up through ethnic minorities, which is appalling. So I had a discussion with somebody from the EU, and they said, well, we would employ people in the Commission or in the Parliament based on their skills, their experience and their knowledge. And I said, so are you telling me that there's no smart black people out there?
Did you say that?
Yeah, that's a really racist thing to say. And I've got a little stat here. So if we look at it, so 1/3 of Belgians are educated to degree level compared to 60% of Afro-Belgians. Yeah. Now, the Afro-Belgians are 4 times more likely to be unemployed. So what does that tell you? Because this is the heart of the EU institutions. So there's something going on here, and it's something that stinks.
Well, thank you. Yeah, James, you want to talk about Wales, situation in Wales?
Yeah, Wales is quite a unique situation, particularly when you look at Labour there. So obviously we've got UK Labour, Jeremy Corbyn, which is kind of there erring between a second referendum and then potentially campaigning for Remain. But in Wales, we have a totally different situation. So the Welsh Assembly, led by Mark Drakeford, are actually already come out and said they are fully Remain. In fact, Mark's actually been out to Brussels here several times with his staff, meeting officials here, working out how they can actually stop Brexit. You know, and this is shocking, really, because when you look at the actual referendum result, Wales voted by a larger majority than the rest of the UK. So I think people in Wales are really upset about this, you know, the betrayal in the Welsh Assembly, led by Mark Drakeford and Wales.
Well, it brings me back to, actually, you know, Boris comes out with some corkers of lines, and this one I thought, he said, you know, if Parliament was a school, it would have been closed down by Ofsted by now. And I thought that was actually brilliant.
Well, I actually liked his one where he said if Parliament was a reality TV show, they'd have all been voted off, and the only benefit would have been watching Burko eat a kangaroo's testicle. So.
But Parliament is a reality TV show, isn't it?
Now.
It is.
Have you watched any normal television? I mean,
no, I'm news all the time, because things change so quickly. And I also think it's important to keep engaged in everything, because it's so easy to go, I've had enough, that's it, you're never voting again. But we can't do that. We'll be giving them everything they want. So
we will. But this is crunch moment.
Yes.
isn't it?
It is.
I mean, I think we're going to see the next few days. I mean, obviously the Remain alliance or, you know, this unity government, they're going to try and force the government's hand to ask for this extension even sooner. I mean, I don't think anyone can predict anything anymore.
No.
No, I know.
Are we leaving?
And yet we're trying.
We are trying. Well, I'm going to leave it on that note. Sadly, that is all we have time for this week. But hang on, I know you don't like this. Go on, you say about this.
Oh no, we can't remove it. And
We've tried.
No, don't you see it all falls apart. But I was just going to stay with the Halloween theme just to say this as we leave. Woo goes the wind, out go the lights, and these 5 little pumpkins roll out of sight. Bye-bye.
Oh,
Bye-bye.